both of us, I think, acknowledge that um, people are making significant investments or reinvestments into their homes, the place where they are safe, where they can be with their family in an unrestricted way, where they can entertain, where they can staycation. Um, so I want to hear about that in the impact of you and your firm and your various offices and projects. And I'd like to bring in the subject of how outdoor space activation, outdoor rooms are playing into that as a secondary thing. And just to sort of get a sense from you as of uh, how is this impacting your firm, the work, are you seeing or have you seen some dynamic shifts in what people are now asking for, things that they're saying, I want to focus my project or I want to focus my investment on this, that they might not have either pre-COVID or 5 or 10 years ago. And I know you've been doing this for 25 or so years, so you've been through numerous economic cycles, stylistic cycles, grow. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. um, you know, we as a firm have always focused on residential design, and so, our niche, has been, sort of these. We've done a lot of renovation work in some beautiful historic neighborhoods with beautiful old architecture, and when I first started out in my practice, I was getting renovations and additions to these, glorious sort of, turn of the century, mansions, let's say, that, sort of, sit on inland lakes and on Lake Michigan on the shore and various places. And when you first start out, you're not really known for a style. You're essentially sort of being sought out for your sensitivity to an existing building, and these were all highly crafted, beautiful, sort of edifices that have been left, from 100 years ago, and so you start building relationships with craftspeople in order to, whatever the changes in the renovations are, you want them to be very consistent with what's going on the rest of the house. And so, but those homes were designed at a time when they were staffed mostly, and so you had the sort of owner family rooms in one part of the house, and then you had these sort of service rooms and the staff areas in the other part of the house, which were given so much less priority, less, the cabinetry and millwork was always a step down. The flooring was a step down. It was, well, now, families live in those spaces. We don't live with 4 or 5 staff. We gather in the kitchen. In fact, that's where every party ends up, is in the kitchen. And when these were built as utility spaces, clearly they lacked that sort of, attraction to hang out in. And so, our first projects were, mudroom projects and kitchen projects and bathroom renovations and things. We started getting known for then being able to add on to these spaces with beautiful craftsmanship and a consistency of the style of the original residence. And so when we were asked to do new residences, a lot of it was sort of traditionally based. And as we got more and more commissions from different clients, and they would, sit down with us and start to, go through, what they were looking to do with their various projects. It became apparent, from the very, very beginning, that there was a need to blend and dissolve the boundaries between inside and outside, to accommodate, the way we live today. People are more active, they're more athletically inclined, they love to gather outside, take advantage. In the upper Midwest, we have, 6 months of amazing weather, and it never seems to be enough. So, to extend seasons, we started creating screen porches with fireplaces and courtyards with fire pits and, places to be able to take the chill off, or even transform into year-round spaces if we needed to for a special event or something like that. So in the very early days of our firm, sort of design concepts were very much inclusive of the entire properties, and some from the point of arrival, all the way through to the outside gathering spaces, buffer spaces, found spaces, adjacent tiny little, sort of side yard spaces that may have been overgrown and forgotten. Maybe add a, French door into a small side room that could get some light and a little terrace to step out to. And lo and behold, our practice started growing. People
So,
really.
to that point, I have to imagine or believe that that was a very premeditated strategy and decision that you made, because what you've just described is quite atypical of the historic architecture design firm that sort of left outdoor space as a, as a distant second where a landscape firm might come in as a second. The fact that you looked at it in a greater umbrella of the total R property in of itself, that was obviously very ahead of the curve of what we're currently seeing or we have seen historically.
It's interesting, but I think you're right. And like, citing a building is, and when you're given an opportunity to renovate an existing building, there, and I don't care what the context is. I mean, it could be, in a completely, nestled in urban lot,
Mhm.
or it could be, on a gorgeous, sort of, beautiful landscape vista, lake property. E- Either one, um, will open up opportunities to sunlight exposure,
Mhm.
microclimates, being able to block, cool spring winds that come off of the Great Lakes and things,
Mhm.
in this particular area. And so when we started getting opportunities from our local clients, would say, hey, would you be interested in a project in California or in New York or somewhere else, Florida in particular?
Mhm.
We started looking, at the same sort of starting point, which was these properties, prevailing winds. Each landscape has a different challenge, and a different asset. And by being able to, sort of abstractly start a process of design, which really kind of embraces all of those things first, gather, analyze, focus, and then be able to start looking at how to set up, the entire sort of site. So the adjacencies of the program between rooms can also have the same sort of um, dynamic quality with the exterior spaces adjacent to it. So, being able to take three major public spaces and gather them around a courtyard, where the courtyard then has an adjacency to a garden or a view, or
Mhm.
allows for a certain microclimate to, enhance it. That's really the sort of, those are sort of the key elements to how we begin to flesh out, a concept into a home. And
And and to that point, then I would also acknowledge that as you look at microclimate and wind and sunshade and those types of factors at the design level, if you look at the impact on human behavior and the experiences by the user as a net result, I hate to use a cliche, but the sum is far greater than the whole of its parts in that context, where user can now, if they're into gardening or art or doing yoga or cooking or whatever it is, you've now, by virtue of the connectivity of that on an aesthetic and design level, you've then created a platform to create far more dynamic usage and experiences for the actual user than the four walls, roof, floor can offer in many cases. So
uh,
it's exponentially the experiential factor is far greater than the physical in many ways.
Absolutely, 100%. And the wellness is the sort of byproduct, right? So it is this, it's really difficult, but to sort of um, explain in words how the environmental impact of good space has upon your entire being. It's your mental state, it's your ability to feel safe. It is that enhancement that, how do you rate that? You know what I mean? It is to some people it's very important, to some people maybe not as important, but there is always a benefit. And then when you also start to lay out the bones, of a building, with its relationship to the site, being, a highest priority, there's another effect that you can start taking advantage of, which is, some of these passive green ideas where the building itself can also be healthy. So
Mhm.
not only is the environment in the space sort of inspiring, but the building itself is healthy. We don't want to use, we want to be conscious about VOCs. We want to be conscious
Mhm.
about, passive, fresh air being able to infiltrate the house.
Yes.
Not always relying on mechanical systems and filters to keep ourselves happy, to
Mhm.
actually have windows that open, to actually have a house that ventilates, to make
Yep.
sure that there's a turnover of air from, on a regular basis, throughout the home. Those things, are also part of the just the sort of basic building blocks of laying out a building. And because you can start to really play with, how, air infiltrates the house, how warm air escapes in the winter time, being able to take advantage of maybe some passive house ideas with
Mhm.
exposure less to the north, so that, the collective energy use on the inside helps build a comfortable environment on the inside,
Mhm.
and to keep energy costs down, save energy. These are all important resources that we need to be very conscious of. And so, I'm, I package a lot of my architecture in these traditional sort of romantic settings.
Yes.
However, they're very smart buildings and they're meant to live well.
I think that, first of all, having spent time on your site, your Instagram, and looking at your work, I think that while you don't necessarily call attention to it, I believe just getting to know you superficially by looking at the work that you put out, the connection to environmental stewardship responsibility is very evident as a core principle and value to you and to your firm. It's evident, and I think that as a society, I think we are at a point where we are somewhat lucky that there has been a dynamic shift where environmental stewardship, whether it's geothermal, whether it's water filtration, air, as you just recommended or just noted, sun shade, where all of these things are now unbelievably cool to the user versus to the more hippie, sort of off the beaten path kind of person who wants to sort of live off grid. The idea that that can now be done, and the pace of technology to accommodate that is amazing, and the more that that becomes mainstream and accessible, I think the greater chance we have on a society based level of not having to compromise space and design and aesthetic and feel for environmental irresponsibility. And I think that is a beautiful sort of constantly moving goal and objective, but one that seems to be, at least in my humble estimation, moving in the right direction from an acceptance, a knowledge, and a request basis from the consumer.
Oh man, I mean, it's amen, because, our industry, unfortunately, is probably the most notorious for creating a larger, carbon footprints. The construction industry, the disposable sort of attitude that, has come since, sort of, the World War II era.
Mhm.
Everything has become so much more disposable. The idea of a 25-year lifelong expectancy of a building is ridiculous. Think about all the resources that went into that building. I just witnessed, a significant skyscraper building that Northwest Mutual Life had built in the 70s as part of their campus in downtown Milwaukee, and they literally tore the entire building down, They didn't tear down the original building that was built in the 1800s that, had the glorious columns and classical facades. But this sort of mid-century 70s era was just sucking out energy like you couldn't believe. And it was much more efficient for them to build a whole new building with the latest technologies. And when you drive by there at night, 7 o'clock at night, the entire building is dark. Like they don't have their lights on all night long in the offices. You see that, there's an evidence about that building now in its prominent location here, which it's unfortunate that, we had to get rid of that. But I think that this new building, that could be there for the next 100 years. And I find that, when I first started this, when I first got into the practice of residential architecture, it wasn't really like an academically sort of, taught profession. We were all sort of, studying, what the Starchitects were doing with these, crazy modern buildings and things. And those are fabulous, but to the vast majority of the population, those are buildings that they're sort of novelty. You see them once in a while. So designing a good building is a really hard thing to do, and it's a serious thing to do. And I think we are now starting to recognize how serious that is, because the energy consumption, the carbon footprint, the longevity, whether or not the building, becomes obsolete within 20 or 25 years. I think that that's a shame. I look at these beautiful old warehouse buildings that were built with craft, even though they were utility, and those buildings will always have a life, always have use. They will, because they weren't built so programmatically specific that they can adapt. And there's a good lesson there.
There is the adaptability factor, and I think that is, today such an important thing, because our parents' generation, they basically lived in one home for the vast majority of their lives. Right. So the adaptability factor wasn't as crucial as today. I think I read recently the statistic: if you're under 40 in the US today, you'll live in 3.2 homes in your lifetime. So I think the ability to take principles and allow for adaptation, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's technology based. I think the brilliance in the creative firm and leadership is to allow that weave of, it's fixed enough that it meets with today, but dynamic enough that you're not locked into things and things can grow and evolve with you. And I think that's we're seeing that happen on so many levels, at the product level, where today, I don't drive a Tesla, but if I did, it would get an update like the same way as my iPhone does. And there's a new technology that's built in. I don't have to bring it to the dealership. So I think we're seeing that happen across so many platforms. And it's going to lead me into really the next thing I wanted to ask you about or talk to you about, which is the notion of leadership. And obviously, I spend a lot of time researching architecture and design firms across the world. We work a lot with architecture and design firms. It's an area that I spend a fair amount of time immersed in. If you go to the average architecture firms or design firms Instagram page, you typically see perfectly styled, beautiful finished projects that really show the glamour shot, the beauty, the end result, the vision, what people are looking for. I go to yours. I see a completely different, very mixed bag of messaging. It is extremely rare that you would go, if ever, you would go to an architecture firm's Instagram page and see a fruit centerpiece on a table. You would see masons working in the middle of a wall. You would see the beginning of projects still in the mud. you would see plans being, you, I think, are demonstrating, whether again, intentionally and by design, or this is just you being you in the way you market and convey yourself as a leader and as a brand, you're really showing the story, and that architecture is not just, you know, angles and building code and materials and construction. You're sharing the micro parts of what this turns into in people's lives. And first of all, I want to compliment you on it because I think it's incredibly refreshing. And secondly, I think it follows suit, at least in the business domain of our world, with the most influential leaders and brands. I think, you know, you rarely see, you know, Mercedes talk about mistakes or missing a quarter, but Elon Musk will proudly and almost unapologetically said, we missed the quarter, we didn't do this right, we had to fix this. I slept on the factory floor. Not afraid of sharing the journey.
Yeah.
I love that in today's business leaders. So I'd like to ask you about it. Was it premeditated? Was this just you being you? And first, I compliment you on, because it makes me as a consumer say that is exactly the kind of firm that I would want to work with if I was renovating or building a home. Because I don't want the fluff. I want the real shit.
Yeah.
And you share that beautifully.
You know, the traditional sort of way people show buildings and, you know, these sort of magazine spreads and things, and, you know, it's sort of what, you know, our industry kind of promotes itself on is, you know, it's great, it's fine, um, uh, but it's static. The dynamic is what happens in those environments, right? And to anybody that's getting a chance to do a project, I feel like everything, the whole experience, being out on an empty lot, the first stakes that you set, you know, where you're walking the client through and say, this is where the living room's going to be. Here's this vista. This is the courtyard. And, you know, it's just wooden stakes and some, you know, fluorescent colored tape on it. But it's so symbolic. This is a 1 to 2 year period of life, or period in their lives, where they're doing something extraordinary. You know, I want their grandkids to find the old photographs of the groundbreaking, or of, oh, look at this picture, look at the house is under construction. That's when grandma and grandpa built the house, you know. Like, I was fortunate in that I grew up, you know, here in Milwaukee, with, you know, a ton of family around, right? I mean, you know, I come from, you know, two sides of the family. They were both here. My grandparents lived across the street, you know, immigrated here from Germany in the 1950s. That's how my dad ended up coming here. You know, their German traditions of cake and coffee, you know, post church, you know, the table set with all of the little offerings from the foundation plantings of all the neighborhood houses were sitting on the table. There was this incredible awareness of your immediate surroundings, an awareness of the time of year and the season, the celebration of those events in those seasons that became, you know, like benchmarks in your life. And they're beautiful, and they're part of the scrapbook of a life, and buildings can play a part of that. And so for me, the way I kind of look at architecture is, architecture is great, but it should be durable, and it should keep the water out, and it should do all these fabulous things that we want it to be. But and some people may love to live in a very stark, you know, minimalist, just purely essential beauty kind of, you know, environment. And then there are those people like myself who just have a passion and a love of things. And I just keep harvesting things from, you know, grocery stores to antique shops to, you know, a walk in the forest. And I gather them and I bring them in, and I have them around me, and they're my little points of comfort. But those are the things that make me exciting. Those little creative endeavors, those little moments of bringing in a piece of spring or a piece of summer, or a piece of winter. That marks the passage of time, and each year's different. And the evidence of those years added up are when you look at the photographs and you realize half the people in there are gone. They're not there. So you cherish the life that was. I cherish the life that's lived in these walls. And to me, that is worth passing on down. If you do it right and it's of quality, then it becomes an heirloom. It becomes something that gets passed down. It becomes something that is treasured. And I love when a building, or that when you think about like the Kennedy compound. I'm not even talking about physically what it looks like, just the whole idea of that has been in a family for how many generations. It served as a backdrop for presidential discussions, for you know world events like we're facing right now, that were determined within some of these walls, these conversations. There's something that's really, to me, significant, and I don't want to overly romance it, but at the same time, I think to just dispose of it is a shame. And I'm really happy when I see families and enterprises embrace their surroundings, where they continue to build and enhance, and the dynamic of the life and the times that are taking place in these spaces have to be accommodated. There has to be a change to the architecture. I love that. I really love that.
What you've just said is incredibly profound and deeply meaningful to me. And I'll share with you fundamentally why I started Urban Bonfire, not knowing then what it would be. I had absolutely no idea. My business plan was on the back of a napkin. It's, I want to be Williams Sonoma for the outdoors. That was it. It really was that simple. I had never heard about an outdoor kitchen. I'd never thought we were going to, it was so far. But what I was trying to capture, and you described it, that rhythm that creates people's lives. And you talk about on the, within the four walls. And what I said to myself was, my friends, even though most of us live in Quebec, which has similar weather patterns as you probably grew up with in Milwaukee, tremendous seasonality, but with that rhythm is built in. The leaves change colors, they fall. Winter comes, the trees blossom. There's a certain more rhythmic aspect to living in places that have more harsh climate versus others.
Yeah.
But I acknowledge that, at least for myself, the greatest memories, the things that I remembered most, the most fun times, were often in outdoor spaces and outdoor environments. Building this bonfire pit at my family country house, which is nothing like the Kennedy compound. My parents bought it in 1980 for $28,000. That's what it was. But that outdoor space became the essence of enjoyment of much of my childhood. And I wanted to bring that spirit back to people's lives, because I believe, and we talked about it earlier in the discussion, that there has been a tremendous historic disconnect between thought, investment, planning in outdoor space versus indoor. And it's starting to change. And this is where I want to ask about this. You know, Outdoors was often the afterthought. People, and I've been to people's homes, lots of them, when we were still serving the consumer and clients directly, which we don't do anymore. But go to somebody's house, they'd spent $500,000 on an indoor kitchen, cabinetry from Europe, wolf subs, every little detail, and 4 feet away through a glass wall was an old rusty barbecue. And that level of disconnect was what I was trying to, in its essence, bridge.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, and what have you seen shifts and changes in what clients are asking for in their prioritization of outdoors? Uh, Has the creation, are there new products and technologies that make it easier for you to activate spaces? I'd love to get your thoughts now on the outdoors as sort of a general topic, because I know you weave it into your projects in a very, very proactive way, unlike many.
Yeah, no, it is as important as the most important rooms of the house. The program, the outdoor program for us is essential in beginning to understand what the client's ambitions are for the project. Because and sometimes it can be ignited and discovered. But what's really amazing is that bringing that to life, like for instance, I had a fantastic client with a beautiful piece of property in Geneva Lake, which is just outside of Milwaukee. Client built a really beautiful residence there. And a few years later, the next door neighbors, they were put their house up for sale, and they ended up purchasing that and building a sports barn entertainment complex on the property to enhance the residence that we already had. And so, I had this beautiful piece of just double lot now on this with this gorgeous exposure. And now I have this ability to create, 5 buildings, and 5 buildings with amenities that can be sort of housed next to, tucked into between all of these elements, including a landscape water feature that sort of flowed down, which was the natural drainage of the topography. The swimming pool, the ability to create a lawn that could be flooded for a skating rink in the winter. We built a
Mm.
warming house out of stone with a fireplace, and you know, all these magical little environments and experiences are really, that was sort of the finishing component when they decided to purchase this other property. Is now all of a sudden it wasn't just twice as nice, it was 10 times nicer, because we were able to create so many opportunities for them to use the outside in different ways. There was a small pond, there was a garden that was raised, there was a wooded area which the client went in, had all of the invasive species removed, and had the whole sort of like forest land, brought back into, a healthy environment that they could maintain, full of indigenous species. And then subsequently, now all the animals that have sort of come back, right?
Hmm.
So the house, the activation of the outside is wonderful, and it's fantastic when you can start adding things like swimming pools and skating rinks and stuff like that. That's great, gardens, etc.
Yep.
But then there was this other part, right? Which is, now we're going to enhance the native, species of the area, give it a chance to really thrive, and let's see what else it attracts. Well, now all of a sudden you have nature and bird watching, and the kids are all involved in watching the frogs and the tadpoles, and like it's just like this wonderful, amazing environment. Well, this client, because of the interest in the outside and all the things that we had brought to it, and ended up having a second residence on a biodynamic, and making a biodynamic farm,
Hmm.
in Southern California, which is all about the outside. And so we decided to design the house completely different. We designed the house, all the public gathering spaces are all the courtyards between the various components of the house. And the house itself, the indoor spaces, are clearly for refuge. So all the activities, from gathering food to gathering together, to swimming, to exercise, to cooking, to eating, dining, watching TV under the stars on a projection TV, all of it's outside in a series of courtyards where the walls are actually the inside spaces. I haven't had a
It's
chance to
it's
put.
it's 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 the resort mentality in somewhere, the cruise ship one. Your room is, yes, you can rest and sleep and take a shower, but the most of the experiences are designed around outdoor connectivity with others, And
Mhm.
it's that kind of thing that people really, I think, are very much drawn to, because it it becomes far less limiting, and the amount of creativity that can be deployed outdoors is substantially more vast than indoors, because it doesn't have the same restrictions of space. I need a roof, I need a ceiling, I need a floor, I need a foundation. You want to build, you're into volleyball, you can do anything with it. It's really a beautiful blank canvas.
I will say the one thing that I really, really, sort of really love also is that um, when you start talking about, creating spaces outside, courtyards, pergolas, outdoor kitchens, outdoor hearths, even the sort of, like swimming pools, ponds, things like that.
Mhm.
The one thing that which I really love, which is great, is the conversation then also needs to include durability and longevity, because the outside is a harsh environment compared to the
Yes.
inside. And
Yes.
so, like, when you're talking about, putting in outdoor appliances for cooking,
Mhm.
you
Yep.
know, for me, I want a variety of things. I want everything from, the wood fired oven to the
Mhm.
wood burning trapeze grill
Mhm.
to, the high, sort of, heat that you can get with, a great gas grill and then maybe also a big sort of water wall that allows you to be able to, you know, continue to sort of, like, especially on this farm where they're, bringing in stuff from the fields and the harvest and everything. I want that bounty right there, right in the kitchen.
Yep.
I don't want it somewhere else. And so to process it, clean it, wash it, make it, sort of, transform it, um, is really kind of a beautiful thing. And
Mhm.
uh, and to be able to do that in an environment where you're completely outside and you're sharing that experience with the other people around you, that's a memory that becomes associated with that place. Those are your best memories, like you brought up before. Those are absolutely my best memories, are those things, those shares, those events, that birthday party barbecue where the food was just amazing, the
Yep.
experience was amazing, the glow of the light, you got a couple glasses of wine in you and you're just in the most happy place.
And by virtue of it being outside, there is a level of playfulness and simplicity that, if you're having, a bunch of people over for a dinner indoors, serving them a burger, for example, it might be, I'm trying to think the right word, but it might be considered as off, versus preparing more of a sort of a meal or a dinner with courses and things like. But outdoors, it's completely appropriate. It's delicious. It's what people want. And you mentioned that one of the first things you said is that, the kitchen is always where the party happens. And whether you're ready for it and the guests are arriving, it's like, oh shit, the guests are on time and I'm running 10 minutes late, and everyone's crowding into that kitchen. You're absolutely right. Um, and that's why I believe that, and why I think that the notion of a kitchen is far more than just cooking. It is grand central for our lives. And I believe that in most cases, the same philosophical principle holds true in outdoor environments. And I think that is the newest, or one of the newest principles that leaders in design and architecture are imparting on their clients, along with great brands in this industry. And I'm sure you know and have worked with Kalamazoo. I
Yeah.
think that they express that vision the way you've just described, that bounty, that place that is not a go between. It is fully immersive. You don't have to run back and forth. I think they accomplish that in their product and their branding in an absolutely brilliant way. Um, and
I
I
agree.
think that people are really getting attached to this. And it's exciting. It's really
It,
exciting.
it's very exciting. And uh, what's really interesting is, I mean, now obviously we have a firm in the upper Midwest. I have an East Coast office that's centered in Pittsburgh, and
Mhm,
the West Coast office is in Santa Barbara.
mhm.
And working in and about Santa Barbara has always been, kind of interesting for me as well, because in order to keep the character of Santa Barbara, they have very stringent building codes. And when you go there, you see, these beautiful, cute little craftsman cottages and small little adobe houses, and it's just they're really Spanish colonial and on tiny little urban lots, with small yards. Uh, but you see a livability that sort of came from the 1920s, right? So after the big earthquake there, there was a lot of construction. People built all these little homes, and they're on tiny lots. And the big house sort of movement came, and people were like, well, I want to tear it down and build something new, 3 stories tall. I want to see the ocean. No. The square footage that you're allowed to build has been so much less. Like the subsequent building codes, you're actually penalized if you do that. So what happens is people find ways to redo those, but because the climate is so nice, you can live outside. You don't
Yes.
need to have a ton of indoor conditioned space. It's kind of unnecessary. And so these series of little yards and gardens, and there's citrus trees and avocado trees everywhere. They're almost like their own little urban farms, and it's really remarkable to see how we talk about this being green so much. Man, they were the original green. They didn't throw out disposable paper cups back then. They washed a china cup. They had a cup of coffee, they washed it. They ate off of a plate. They didn't just have ease paper plates and tearing down forests and stuff like that for disposable paper products. They all lived in a much more sort of like green environment. And when you go to Europe, like you go to a little roadside fair, where they have a few rides or whatever, and I walk to the cafe, and they give you this fabulous espresso with a cup and a saucer and a little metal spoon, and they wash it. It's at a fair. That never happens here, and it's just because they don't have the resources to dispose of. They just don't.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I spend, or not now, and I have spent tremendous amounts of time in Costa Rica.
Mm,
Every year I go with my wife. It's where I got married, and I can tell you the little hotel that we stay at, which has environmental stewardship and responsibility as one of its core values. I don't think that for the entire hotel, which is about 30 rooms, I don't think they fill up a garbage bag a week compared to what most people do in their homes, which is 2 or 3 or 4 a week. It's
yeah,
just a complete, because it's a proactive, and it's not a sacrifice. It's a joy.
it's cultural,
That's the difference. It is cultural. It is a joy to protect my and to take care of my, and here for most people, "Ugh, I got to compost, recycle. It's a pain in the ass." It's not joyful, which makes it people apprehensive. Whereas specifically, you mentioned Europe, in the Scandinavian countries, it is a joyful, it is a responsibility of society to take care of the future for our kids and our grandkids, and we have to do it. So
yeah.
I completely agree with you.
And I think our country is now starting to embrace it. I think you know uh, when you're in places that are much more environmentally delicate, um, California, Colorado, other places. Um, I lived in Colorado for a while, and I noticed that they don't use road salt, on their highways, and they use sand.
Mhm.
They have a whole different mentality, but they can't really afford to pollute, using road salt and things that,
Yep.
you kind of, when you grow up and it's been sort of the norm, and you look at these vast mountains of salt that are, sort of perched on, the sort of municipal parking lots that are going to get spread out all over, you're like wondering, that cannot be good for the environment, and then for the water systems and for the natural sort of plant materials and things like that. So it's, travel for me and being able to work in other regions of the world has exposed me to methodologies that other cultures have embraced that are far more advanced than us when it comes to the environment. You wouldn't
Mhm.
think about, draining a horse shelter in a field in Germany, out into the pasture.
Right.
That water gets collected and it actually gets treated before
Mhm.
it's released into the watershed. And it's just
Sure.
part of their building process.
Yes.
So we need to learn a little bit more and embrace some of these because clearly it's available.
It is of yes, it is, and I think it will be, with technology and with scale, it will become increasingly available and or law and or far more sought after, where the consumer doesn't have to necessarily spend 2 or 3x in order to get the environmental responsibility or stewardship on a car or a countertop or a roofing structure or a way to power their home. And I just think that is the exciting, that's the Disneyland like excitement for me in terms of where we are going as an industry and as a society, because I think, as I said earlier, I think we're going in the right direction overall. um, so
Well,
I
even
think it's really cool.
yeah, even the latest, I think, you know, um, obviously, here we are, on the eve of a new inauguration, and new leadership. And you brought up the word leadership earlier. I get very excited when I hear about, the government wanting to back alternative, energy resources and development of, green initiatives. To create again maybe some more awareness of the environment that the private industry could respond to and bring about this apparatuses that will assure that the generations beyond us will have clean and safe environments to live and thrive in, even better than what we've seen. I mean, it's been dramatically different than the pollution films I remember looking at when I was in fourth grade on TV, where they were just dumping junk into the Cleveland
Yep.
rivers and
Yep.
all these. Totally different now. It's completely different than that. Even in Milwaukee, I remember seeing that when I was a kid. Just the smokestacks and everything everywhere. There's hardly any smokestacks anymore.
I think if we give the vat look, there's not perfect rules on everything, but I believe most more people are inherently good than the other way around. And I think if you give people the choice to make the right decision, you don't have to enforce it as much. So government can obviously get involved and it's a great initiative. But I think if you were to do a poll of, thousands and thousands of people, most would say whether the government tells me to or not, I'm going to put on my seatbelt.
Yeah,
It's just the right
yeah,
thing to do. Now, the ticket is not the deterrent for the vast, I'm sure there's some, but not the vast majority of people. And I believe the same thing holds true on if it makes sense and it's accessible and it's presented to me in such a way that I'm doing good with very minor changes to human behavior. I think most people adapt that with fair ease.
yeah. And for me, I think the biggest challenge is making it available for the vast public. I think right now, if you have the financial resources, you can be the best steward of imaginable, um,
Yes.
and that's wonderful that those individuals are willing to lay that investment out for it because they're trying to set an example.
Yes.
But I'm anxious for it to be mainstream, and not for any reason except for the beginning of that sort of generational cultural shift that I think we sort of became a very disposable society. We've
Mhm.
now seen the ills of how that sort of carelessness can affect us in the long run. and I think
Mhm.
it's starting to shift, but it's not as it's not as fully mainstream as I think we need to be.
I could not agree more. And I think it's, one of the unfortunate features is that there is an economic cost to mindful living, whether that's environmental health, that the idea today still that you can get a burger for 99 cents and it's, 6.99 for a small salad. There are principles not only but in every aspect where it
Yeah.
takes a certain economic level to live mindfully. But I think hopefully over time and scale, that bridge comes down on sort of all levels, and it's easier, and it doesn't have to be an economic choice. Um, and I think that over time, we, like in every other in other things, we're going to get there. You
Well,
know.
your whole concept of urban bonfire is really awesome because having have a place, a little sort of cabin up on a lake in northern Wisconsin. The feature of the yard is a huge bonfire ring, and it is the gathering place. It's where I felt the most connected to my friends when if I invite someone up to share in that experience, um, you're either going to never invite them back or you're going to love them forever. And it's because you can connect into this place where you let go of some of that armor that you wear, and
Yes.
you get a chance to experience the real emotions and the real soul of the people that you may have known and liked, but now you're really getting to understand, their makeup and their being. And I feel like I've connected with you on your passions and your motivations for, bringing, people into a conversation.
I it is what drives me every day to continue to do this, because I believe that it is important, and I have fun doing it. And it's I'll tell you, it all came. I'll give you the content. We built our first kitchen in 2014. Nothing like what we do today. It was a 3.5 month. I talk about it in my presentations of why we don't do that anymore. Just the painstaking effort of doing it. But I remember the client telling me afterwards, every year before my kids go away to camp, I give my wife and I give them the choice of where we go to dinner as a family the day before my kids go off to camp for 6 weeks. And they used to pick, whether it was a really nice Italian restaurant to this famous steakhouse in Montreal that we have called Moishus. It's been around for over 100 years. And he said, now they just say, Dad, can you make your ribs and can we just be at home and eat outside, because that experience is more meaningful. The food is better. That's what they actually want.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come down to much more than that for me to sort of say, I feel a responsibility to, if that is the net result, beyond it looking beautiful and pretty in the pictures and the design, but if the net result, when you get away all of the blinders and remove all the filters, is that, I feel good.
You know what? That is something to be proud of, because uh, that will serve them well their entire life. You know what I mean? They will get so much more out of life being able to go back to those lessons, connect on such, sort of basic human sort of level, and that consciousness and that sharing, those are the things that strengthen the ability. Empathy is such a gift if you have it, and to those that unfortunately can't or don't have that ability, that is where I think you see people, not being able to be fulfilled. That's where they need more material things. That's where they need more stimulation. They don't have this inner contentment. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that, when you have worked long enough, you can essentially afford things that you always dreamed about. But for some reason, I've realized I just have no need for them anymore. And I'd rather spend my time on a, great meal, gathered around my campfire or my table with the people that I think are most inspiring to me, the other creatives in my life that I've had a chance to know, the people that, have set their priorities in a place that I admire and want to emulate. Those are the things that inspire me, more than, a designer car, or, you know.
To that exact point, I can recall, this past summer and summers before, around our bonfire pit, and having the owner and managing director of a hedge fund, the CEO of a publicly traded company, and a guy making 16 bucks an hour who lays drywall sitting around, and you would never know the difference.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, the great joy in outdoor, and that it just brings people back to the studs, and it's real. And to your point, that's really the environment creates the platform for that realness to come out.
Oh,
And I love it.
it's the best, right? I mean,
It
all of a
is.
sudden it's like the clouds part, and oh my God, look at the sky. Oh my God, look at the stars. Oh, wait, was that lightning? Is there a storm coming in the middle of the night? Or were those lightning bugs? Was that a bullfrog? Was that the northern lights? Was that,
Yep.
I mean, these are all the most incredible gifts that you can't even purchase. You can purchase, but those, when they come up and you get a chance to experience it with someone, there's a connection. It's cosmic.
Hard to complain about crown moldings didn't come out the way I expected it when you're in that kind of environment. So I completely agree, and I love that you see it that way.
Yeah.
Wade, this has been a really not only a pleasure and honor. I acknowledge and agree that I think there's this very interesting connection, and I hope that we get to talk more. I hope post-pandemic my travels lead me to somewhere where you are, and we could, break bread and have a lunch or dinner together. I would enjoy it very much. And I don't know if you've been to Montreal, and if you have not, from an architectural level, I mean, I note Pittsburgh, for example, in terms of Gothic revival. But if your travel, and it's a very easy flight, Milwaukee, Montreal is 2 hours door to door. If at any point your travels allow you to visit Montreal, I think that you would have a remarkable experience, and it would be a great pleasure for me to welcome you and
I,
show you a little bit around my city.
I'd love it. I can't wait. And I love the insider tours are always the best, because those are the
Yes.
things where I get to find the little neighborhood markets that have like the best cannoli or something. That's what
Yep.
I love. That
And that is what I love to do. So I would love, hopefully that happens sooner than later, when we can put COVID behind us.
Let's make that happen. Absolutely. And it's coming. So, and Canada is definitely one of the places that I've never been and want to go so badly. And growing up in Wisconsin, I don't know why we've never been, but I've never been across the border ever.
Easy to get to. We'll change that. We'll change that sooner than later.